Well, the 2010s have not long passed us by with all the grace and decorum of a Funko Pop figure being fired out of a cannon, and being the astute and handsome gaming historian I am, I began to ponder the decade's place in the grand scheme of things. How good were the 2010s for video games? Surely, considering technological progression and the linear flow of time, it should have been the best, right? Games were capable of more than ever before, endless possibilities. Well, in a lot of ways, it was the best. The games that were good reached higher heights than ever before, technologically and especially narratively. And as the industry grew and swelled, so many more games in general were made across the board compared to previous decades, which obviously gave us more chances to birth masterpieces. At the same time, technological advancements are not always strictly a positive. If the prospect of impending nuclear destruction hasn't taught you that, wait until the end of the 2020s when your sex bot gains sentience and starts asking you about its purpose mid-coitus. Ugh, lame. All the new possibilities in video games led to people trying some dumb shit. The success of the Wii inspired Nintendo's competitors to try their hand at some absolutely shambolic motion control peripherals. Out-of-touch executives started using E3 as an excuse to sell consoles based on the amount of TV you could watch on them and whether or not they came with Netflix. And Sonic the Hedgehog had a worse decade than J.D. Salinger, and he literally died 4 weeks into it. It was a decade of so many steps forward and steps back you'd think we'd spent 10 years playing fucking QWOP. The games were good, but there was more bullshit fogging up the periphery than ever before. The best years in the 2010s were the ones where the good games were just allowed to be good games with no nonsense in between, and the worst years, well, let's get started. In relation to just how good they were for video games, here's every year in the 2010s, ranked from worst to best. But first, a quick and important disclaimer. I cannot say the word gaming unironically. Apart from this one explaining it, I just can't do it, okay? I have a degree, and this word has been ruined for me, so I'll have to find some workaround for it as the video goes on. Okay, let's go! If you were tuned in to video game discourse all around 2012, this picture of Mass Effect 3's cover art should bring back a lot of memories. As someone who had never even touched a Mass Effect game at the time, even I was fully aware of how much people hated this game's ending. It was a huge point of controversy that blew up online so much that developer BioWare had to do damage control and release extended cut DLC in an attempt to retroactively fix the ending that had gotten fans so riled up. Mass Effect 3, in my opinion, is a pretty big disappointment overall, especially compared to Mass Effect 2. It seems to me that the ending may just be the cherry on top of this raisin cookie masquerading as chocolate chip, and the fact that BioWare thought it wise to put a cherry on a cookie in the first place is just weird. That's not where cherries go, BioWare. What I can say with certainty is that a developer having to try and redo a game's ending after launch is practically unprecedented. I mean, wow. You have to fuck up for something like that to be seen as even remotely necessary. Mass Effect 3 was far from the only high-profile disappointment in 2012 though. In fact, this year is practically defined by them. I don't think I heard a single good thing said about Assassin's Creed 3. Resident Evil 6 was pretty much universally disliked by fans on release, and Paper Mario Sticker Star gave a beloved series about the most unnecessary and unenjoyable overhaul a series has ever received. I can keep going, by the way. Hitman Absolution, Diablo 3 on release, Ninja Gaiden 3, hell, Halo 4 came out this year, and while it apparently reviewed well, I don't think I heard a peep about it all year. Was I just not looking in the right places, or was this game just not as big a deal as it should have been? Call of Duty Black Ops 2 was a fine Call of Duty game, and one that I got a good amount of enjoyment out of, but it was also still just your run-of-the-mill COD game when it felt like the series was starting to get stale. Not just that, but much like every other decent game that came out this year, it came out right at the end of it. Fire Emblem Awakening was fantastic, and practically brought Fire Emblem back into the mainstream by itself, but it's one of very few games that I'd call good that I can find in 2012's first half. Otherwise, all of 2012's critical darlings didn't show up until the fourth quarter. XCOM Enemy Unknown in October. Telltale's The Walking Dead started in April, but only got meaty midway through the year and concluded in November. And then the game that was in my mind the very best thing that came out in 2012, Far Cry 3, didn't show up until November 29th. All throughout this scattershot year, you've got Microsoft and Sony still clinging on to the Kinect and PlayStation Move respectively, with the former still making it a significant part of their increasingly grating E3 press conferences. Early in 2012, Sony released the PlayStation Vita, which was supposedly pretty good. Unfortunately, Sony seemed to forget that pretty quickly, as the absence of any Vita presence whatsoever would soon become a running joke whenever any kind of Sony event or announcement rolled around. You'd be forgiven for thinking that 2012 redeemed itself somewhat with a slew of solid games in its second half, but in this second half, something else happened. Nintendo released this little ditty called the Wii U. Oh no. On a personal note, 2012 was the worst year of my life. Something a girl didn't reciprocate my emotions. God! You can't help but wish the Mayans were right. "2016 is a pretty uneventful year all in all, saved from the bottom spot simply due to having more good games. Two major disappointments mar this year, however. The much ballyhooed No Man's Sky finally released in August, and to the surprise of no one with realistic expectations and understanding of game design, was not able to come close to the levels of hype surrounding it. Controversy followed, as droves of people began lampooning Hello Games, and in particular managing director Sean Murray, for the amount of lofty promises and sketchy statements he'd been making about the game in public appearances, the truthfulness of which were often highly debatable. To give credit to Sean Murray and Hello Games, though, in the years since, the team have knuckled down and really turned the ship around, slowly turning No Man's Sky into a highly acclaimed game that's seemingly beloved by just about everyone who plays it. Such a redemption story has not been afforded to Mighty No. 9, however, which forever remains a cautionary tale on shelling out money to support a game on Kickstarter. There's much less risk in supporting people on Patreon, I hear. Mighty No. 9, positioned to be a successor to the oft-neglected Mega Man games, flopped pretty dramatically, technologically and thematically underwhelming in a lot of departments. A sad story, more than anything. A small team never wants to make a bad game. Aside from some mid-console generation upgrades like the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, there's not really much else to say about 2016 aside from it had some decent games. The Doom reboot shocked everyone by being actually good. Uncharted 4: A Thief's End got 9s and 10s across the board, and Overwatch practically swept the entire industry despite being strictly less good than Team Fortress. Perhaps the most noteworthy thing to happen in 2016 was Pokemon Go, which was so ridiculously viral it might as well have been a warning for the coronavirus. Pokemon Go would be even more influential if augmented reality games had taken off even remotely since it came out, but alas, I am yet to share a pint with Kratos at Wetherspoons. "2019 can be largely characterised as a year where the big names faltered and the little guys picked up the slack. With the notable exceptions of Devil May Cry 5 and Shakira Shadows Don't Lie, which seemed pretty much universally loved, a lot of well-known franchises and developers disappointed this year. Pokemon Sword and Shield seemed to have been the turning point for the franchise in all the wrong ways, drawing far more criticism and ire than any previous Pokemon games and making people a whole lot more ready to knock Game Freak and the series as a whole. Kingdom Hearts 3 was not a disaster and has its supporters, most of whom still wear ripped cargo pants, which is a damn sight better than many of us expected given its turbulent development history and 14-year gap between its predecessor, but the general sentiment seems to be that it's not exactly a great game overall and a bit of a flat ending to the trilogy, a sentiment I'd be inclined to agree with. And then there was Anthem, a disaster through and through, and a game that is very unlike BioWare in just about every way. Seems we have our good old definitely not blood-sucking friends at EA to thank for that one. On the other hand, games like House's Untitled Goose Game and ZAUM's Disco Elysium were held up as the messianic saviours of a year where big companies and publishers were failing us. The latter using revolutionary dialogue mechanics to smatter beautiful, evocative prose over a vague simulacrum of the tense Eastern European political climate, and the former being a game where you're a really nasty goose. Disco Elysium would go on to win 4 awards at 2019's Game Awards, tying it for the most awarded game in the show's history. As someone who suspects they have ADHD and zones out when bombarded with too much text, I was pleasantly surprised that Disco Elysium compelled me long enough to finish it, and think its praise is pretty damn well deserved. 2019 kind of felt like a waiting period. Microsoft and Sony had both announced their intentions to unveil their next generation consoles in 2020, and it felt like a lot of the big releases were just treading water. It says a lot that one of this year's most critically lauded games was a remake of Resident Evil 2. I'm not saying it wasn't good, I'm saying it says a lot. Oh, Google Stadia also came out this year.
This is a demo.
When 2015 was good, it was good. I'm talking like The Witcher 3 levels of good, Undertale levels of good, Bloodborne levels of good. However, it wasn't good consistently, it was mostly divisive. Some people will tell you that Fallout 4 was a good game, worthy of its series, but people who have actually played good games, such as myself, will tell you that that is wrong. It's not a disaster by any standards, but a great example of the difference in quality of writers at Bethesda compared to Obsidian. Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain was supposedly really great gameplay-wise, but its story a bit of a cobbled mess. And you can't really talk about Metal Gear Solid in the year 2015 without talking about the falling out between Konami and series producer Hideo Kojima, which led to Kojima leaving the company and thus sadly having to leave the Metal Gear series behind to found Kojima Productions towards the end of the year. Not only that, but this left the impending Silent Hills stranded in the ether, left forever to drift terrifyingly as PT and nothing more. 2015 was often also a sad year. This was the year Satoru Iwata passed away, throwing Nintendo into limbo for a bit as they appointed interim president Tatsumi Kimishima, and to add on to the gloom, EA got as rampantly greedy and anti-consumer as they'd ever been with the controversial release of the rebooted Star Wars Battlefront in all of its microtransaction glory. Large companies were going through turmoil more than anything this year, whilst indie games continued flourishing. Their latest diamond in the rough being the aforementioned and absolutely monstrous, pun not intended, Undertale, a game that felt like it turned all of indie games on their head again for like the third time in 4 years, and didn't ask players to gamble to see the good stuff. Maybe soon we'll outgrow the need for companies, and we'll just throw all of our money at weird little people in their basements to make video games for us for the rest of time. I'd like that. I like the fast food worker. He made me laugh. If you could ignore Microsoft releasing the abominable Kinect this year, 2010 is actually pretty solid. Nintendo weren't up to much, but the one big thing they did, that being Super Mario Galaxy 2, has gone on to be one of the most highly regarded games of all time, currently occupying a top 10 all-time highest game score, 97 out of 100 on Metacritic. Aside from that, Donkey Kong Country Returns was a very welcome surprise and return to a great retro franchise, but there's not a ton more to say about Nintendo in 2010. Indie games, on the other hand, were very busy and just starting to stake their claim as a legitimate force in the industry that can generate hype on the levels of the biggest studios. Super Meat Boy and Limbo had a lot of people buzzing, but nothing occupied a space on the internet quite like Amnesia: The Dark Descent, which may have to thank a certain screaming Swede for a lot of its success. What will he go on to do? Red Dead Redemption released to a lot of fanfare, giving Rockstar something else to do that wasn't Grand Theft Auto, which is to say, Grand Theft Auto with cowboys. 2010 in my mind, though, should forever be remembered as the year of two monumental RPGs. Mass Effect 2 was such an improvement over the original in every way that it's kind of insane, and critics clearly recognised that, with this game rightfully being praised all over the place. Strangely, they were somewhat quieter about Fallout New Vegas later that year, but myself and many fans have since come to recognise it not just as one of the best RPGs of all time, but one of the best games of all time. 2010 isn't as stacked as some other years, but it has fewer big disappointments and major flops as a lot of the others. There's not a lot of hardware stuff going on, nor is there a ton of industry politics, just a bunch of pretty damn good games. Consistent would be a good word for it. Despite the Gamergate controversy, doing its best to make anyone with morals or an IQ of over 7 want to forget about video games forever, 2014 was a pretty good year. Shovel Knight was an inspiring tale of what a Kickstarter video game can be. Evocative without being derivative, respectful of what came before it, but also willing to reach out and try different things. Not even Mighty No. 9 a couple years after was able to completely undo the good that Shovel Knight's success did. 2014 doesn't really have a banner release or a big all-time great candidate, unless you consider Shovel Knight, which I think would be pretty valid, but it does have a nice slew of good games with little strings attached. My baby Super Smash Bros. For Wii U came out and finally gave people a good reason to own a Wii U. Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor surprised everyone with its fascinating Nemesis system, which is sadly patented and can't be used by other developers. Ugh. And Destiny was also there. So, a big year for white guys who wear backwards snapbacks and love Marvel. A lot of companies made moves in 2014. Amazon bought Twitch, which I am inclined to dislike because Amazon's wealth makes me want to burst a blood vessel, but I also can't deny the joy that Prime Twitch subs have brought me as a fledgling creator and tortured artist desperately in need of money. Nintendo began releasing Amiibo this year, and Blizzard would release Hearthstone, both of which would become huge cash cows for their respective companies in the years to come. Throw in a whole bunch of solid releases in 2014, like eventual Game of the Year award winner at the Game Awards Dragon Age Inquisition, Bayonetta 2, Mario Kart 8, and the terrifying Alien Isolation, which I got about 4 hours into before noping the fuck out, and you've got a good, if unspectacular year. It took them 8 years, but in 2018, Rockstar released the sequel to the beloved Red Dead Redemption. The game isn't considered to be perfect. Many fans malign some archaic design choices and unnecessary ambition in the open world that bogs down the gameplay. But despite its divisiveness in some circles, it's been largely praised by critics and fans alike. This is why it's so surprising that it didn't win Game of the Year at the Game Awards later that year. That honour went to the shockingly mature and heartfelt reboot of God of War, which turned Kratos from a frothing and one-dimensional being of pure rage into a dad? In my world, these things are both the same. When Monster Hunter World came out in early 2018, I snatched it off the shelf at my local game, thinking to myself, hey, that one of the 3DS was pretty cool, maybe I'll enjoy this. And then proceeded to bunk all 3 of my university lectures that week to cram in near enough 100 hours of total powered on time, and I regret fucking nothing. Conversely, when Smash Ultimate came out later that year after getting me more excited to play than perhaps any other game in recent memory, well, the less said the better. I could go on. 2018 is a year of a lot of good-ass games. Celeste, Sony's Insomniac's Marvel's Spider-Man, A Way Out. However, a lot of people missed them because they were completely swept up in the Battle Royale craze that had well and truly settled down and laid its eggs by now. PUBG was still going strong, but then there was Fortnite, which had released a year earlier and was just now truly coming into its own. If they weren't neglecting the year's biggest releases for these games, then perhaps they'd met a truly terrible fate and cashed out on the Power Armor edition of Fallout 76, one of this decade's biggest disasters. Fallout 76 is perhaps the biggest thing holding this year back from being even higher. It might be the only thing that matches the likes of 2016's duo of No Man's Sky and Mighty No. 9, a consumer's nightmare at every turn, overpriced, overhyped and undercooked. Barely functioning by all accounts, and with some utterly hilarious special editions that offered up weird shit like Nuka-Cola Dark, which apparently didn't even taste that good, and canvas bags, of which the good ones that actually looked like the advertisements were given to influencers, and the shitty ones apparently given to all the average consumers who paid way too much for this bullshit. Naughty Dog's The Last of Us was a monumental occasion, a cinema-like game that could invest even those with the most passive of interest in games. It feels like it played a huge part in legitimizing games as a medium, and I would say inspired the industry hugely for the rest of the decade. It deserved every accolade it got in my mind. Sadly, it was a bit swept up in all the hype of the new console generation. As the leaves turned from green to orange, the PS3 became the PS4, and the Xbox 360 became the Xbox One. For whatever fucking reason. Yet, 2013 is such a huge year in video games that the new console generation risked not even being the story of the year because Grand Theft Auto 5 released and was every bit as monolithic as the trailers and Rockstar's reputation would have you believe. A great game, even if it crumbled under its own weight a little bit on occasion, but would you believe me if I told you that I don't even think I've talked about the best game this year yet? I mean, call me biased if you want, because this is notably one of my favourite games of all time, but I don't think it's biased to just think a game is a masterpiece, and that's what I think Rayman Legends is. A criminally overlooked work of art, a beacon of fun, creativity and colour, and a game that does not get discussed as possibly the best 2D platformer ever made as often as I think it deserves. Critics loved it when it came out, but even then, I think it deserved more. One of the best ever in my mind. On the note of the best ever, how about The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds, eh? Quietly one of the best Zelda games ever made too, eh? Yeah, fair to say, there was a lot of good shit this year. Nintendo wanted to give you reasons to buy the Wii U they'd released late into the previous year, and Sony and Microsoft were coming out all guns blazing to try and win the next big console war. Fair to say Microsoft brought a super soaker. The disappointment of the Xbox One and Microsoft executives' tone-deaf focus on sports and TV, the disappointment of Bioshock Infinite and Aliens, Colonial Marines and the like couldn't take away from all the games I mentioned and then some. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, Assassin's Creed 4, Black Flag, Pikmin 3, the list goes on. "2011 is stacked, like ridiculously stacked. A lot of the games that came out this year would go on to shape the industry in various ways for the rest of the decade. This year just went big all throughout, and even if it didn't always hit, like the, in my mind, hugely overrated Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, you kinda have to respect the sheer influence almost every big title in 2011 had. Skyrim was enough to make a year significant on its own, but then you add in Dark Souls, Portal 2, Uncharted 3, Batman Arkham City, and the full release of fucking Minecraft for fuck's sake. Even if other years have been better, this might just be the biggest year in video games ever. I think it even outguns our number one, even if that brings it close. In 2011, Nintendo released the 3DS, a fantastic little piece of hardware that continued to display Nintendo's dominance in the handheld market. A lot of Nintendo's best games of the next decade would be on the 3DS, such as, for example, the quietly fantastic Mario Kart 7, a game that I don't think gets anywhere near enough credit as one of the best in the series. And hey, thank God they were hitting home runs on the 3DS, because The Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword late that year on the Wii was, well, it was something. I'm sure some people like it. I imagine those same people are also into ball busting. There's a lot of forgettable filler here in 2011, like Dead Island, Assassin's Creed Revelations and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, but that's because the year is so ridiculously huge that a big release, underwhelming or not, was lurking around the corner every month. For every mild disappointment there's a hidden gem like The Witcher 2 or Sonic Generations, pretty much the last time a Sonic game would be good for another 5+ years. If you could pick one year in #gaming to live in stasis for the rest of your life, it might have to be this one. I imagine you'd never get bored. Unless you played Skyward Sword, that is. Fucking hell. Not stopping at being by far the greatest year for video games in the 2010s, 2017 might just have a claim for being the absolute craziest year in all of video game history. I mean, what can compete with it? 2007? 1998? Maybe, but this year is unreal. Let me rattle off some names for you, and even though they were significant, I'm going to leave off the likes of Yooka-Laylee, Mass Effect Andromeda and Sonic Forces because, well, yikes. I'm sure you understand. Here we go. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, Horizon Zero Dawn, Cuphead, Persona 5 in some regions, Sonic Mania, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, Nier Automata, Fortnite, Resident Evil 7, Hollow Knight, Neo, and the Crash Bandicoot N. Sane trilogy. Yeah, that is immense. And of course, there's obviously a lot more that I'm sure I'm missing. I'd implore you to go look it up for yourself and see the sheer lunacy that released in 2017. It's kind of crazy to think all of these games released within a span of a year. The release of the Nintendo Switch probably does a lot for this year, with the company feeling the need to push out 2 huge first-party titles as system sellers in the form of the unbelievable Breath of the Wild, which would eventually deservingly win Game of the Year at the Game Awards, and the definitely also existing Mario Odyssey, which a lot of people love, and I can at least see why. As it stands though, 2017 is by far #gaming's best year in recent #memory. The best of the 2010s, and I think very likely one of the best ever. Maybe top 3? I don't know, I might need to do a bit more sleuthing to justify that, but it's what my monkey-brained instincts are telling me. Jesus, what a year. This video was a rough transcription of the huge listicle I wrote over on my Patreon some time ago. If you want access to that and many other similar writings I've done, then perhaps you could consider pledging. It's hugely helpful to me, and I appreciate every penny, so thank you if you do so. Recently, the amount of high-tier patrons has gotten so high that it'd simply be ridiculous to even try and read out all their names at the end of a video, and I'm so thankful for that, especially when YouTube is being as uncooperative as it is lately. You can also check out some beautiful Fudj merch at a link I'm going to put in the description, and if you really want to go the extra mile, then I don't know, maybe just share this video around, make a little bit of noise about it. This video, as I'm sure you can see, took an immense amount of hard work and effort. I tried out a whole bunch of new editing tricks and got, loads of new graphics made up just for it, and maybe if you could make a bit of noise about it, then that'd be much appreciated. Here's to the future of #gaming and time in general. More decades, please. I would like more of them to exist.